On the morning of August 18, 2025, the impossible became reality. Captain Ibrahim Trayori of Burkina Faso stood before the world and did what no African leader had dared in generations. He ordered the entire United States Embassy to pack up and leave his soil. Who tells the most powerful nation on earth to take down its flag? Who lowers the stars and stripes and raises instead the banner of sovereignty? Was it madness? Or was it the birth of a new independence? Tonight, we ask, can a poor nation survive without bowing to aid? Or will history prove that freedom without bread is too heavy a price? The first spark. It all began not with gunfire or explosions, but with paper, a cold stack of pages flown in from Washington. For American officials, it was routine, just another report stamped and signed in air-conditioned rooms. But for Captain Ibrahim Trayori, it was a dagger thrust into the very chest of his nation. Buried in those paragraphs was an insult that cut deeper than any bullet. The Burkinabe army, the same men who bled at Jibwa, who fell at Arbinda, who stood between villages and chaos, had been listed side by side with terrorists. The report did not see fathers, brothers, and sons who had given their lives. It saw only statistics and accusations. Trayori's hand slammed onto the oak table with such force that glasses rattled. His eyes blazed as he read aloud, voice trembling with fury. Do they not see? 2 million of our people displaced. 2,000 civilians slaughtered on our soil just last year. And yet, America dares to write that our defenders are no different from those who murder our children. The silence of his ministers was heavier than stone. It was the kind of silence that carries fear, shame, and the weight of history. Everyone in the room knew this was no longer about paperwork. This was about dignity, about who had the right to define the story of Burkina Faso. The turning point. That evening, Trayori's words blazed across state television, burning into every home, every street corner, every soldier's barracks. His voice carried defiance that shook the capital. They say our army violates human rights. But who gave America the right to define our dignity? In the barracks, young soldiers clenched their fists until their knuckles turned white. In villages, widows who had buried their husbands wept at the insult, tears turning into rage. And in the streets of Ouagadougou, whispers became chants, chants became a roar, sovereignty is not for sale. Advisors tried to temper him, warning softly, Captain, America funds our schools, our medicine, our lifelines. But Trayori's reply came like fire cracking through dry wood. Better hunger in freedom than bread in humiliation. Aid without dignity is nothing but a chain. And I refuse to see my people shackled. In that moment, a line was drawn, not in ink, but in fire. A nation wounded had found its voice, and its leader had declared, dignity comes before survival. The historic decision. By noon, the ink had dried on the decree. By evening, its thunder rolled across the entire Sahel like a storm breaking centuries of silence. The announcement was blunt, sharp, and final. The government of Burkina Faso declares the United States Embassy persona non grata. Its staff must depart within 72 hours. The word spread from radios, newspapers, and television screens until they echoed in every home and market stall. And as dusk fell on Ouagadougou, the streets erupted. Crowds surged toward the embassy gates as if history itself demanded their presence. Women ululated in piercing waves of sound that rose above the rooftops. Youth leapt into the air, waving Burkinabe flags until the cloth blurred red, green, and gold against the hot evening sky. Elders, their faces carved by decades of struggle, lifted their hands to the heavens in gratitude. Then came the moment etched forever into memory. Behind the embassy's steel fences, American Marines stepped forward to lower the stars and stripes. The flag descended slowly, its colors wilting under the Sahel sun. To Washington, it was routine protocol. To Burkina Faso, it was the funeral of foreign dominance. Silence fell for a heartbeat, then shattered. From the crowd, an old veteran on a crutch lifted his voice, ragged but strong. They told us we were too weak to stand. Today, our captain proved them wrong. We bury not America, but arrogance itself. The roar that followed shook the streets. For the first time in decades, the capital did not look outward in submission. It looked inward, upward, proud. The world reacts. In Washington, The news landed like a thunderclap. Screens in the State Department glowed with images of the American flag being lowered in Ouagadougou, and panic rippled through the corridors of power. "This is diplomatic suicide," snapped one senior official, his voice cutting through the tension. Statements were drafted with urgency, threats rolled out with precision. The United States would cut over $100 million in aid for health, schools, and security. "If they want isolation," another growled, "then let them pay the price." In Paris, the mood was grim. French diplomats, still reeling from being forced out of Mali and Niger, muttered in frustration, "He is cutting the last rope that binds him to Europe." One advisor warned darkly that without those ties, Burkina Faso was drifting into dangerous waters. In Brussels, the European Union issued stiff, cautious warnings. Reports spoke of deepening isolation and endangered cooperation. To European ears, Trayori's defiance was not courage, it was recklessness. But in Moscow, the response was thunderous applause. On state television, commentators hailed Captain Trayori as a lion of sovereignty. And Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov stepped before microphones with deliberate weight. "This is not madness. It is emancipation. Africa has chosen dignity over dictates, and for this, we applaud Burkina Faso." In Beijing, there were no headlines, no fiery speeches. But quiet planes landed in Ouagadougou, bearing envoys who carried offers of partnership, humanitarian shipments, and credit lines. The message was subtle but clear. China does not interfere. China only partners. In Ankara, the reaction was open and warm. Turkey announced new pledges: hospitals, schools, relief missions, and brotherhood. A spokesman declared, "Burkina Faso does not stand alone. We stand as a bridge, as brothers, as partners in faith and development." And in Ouagadougou, Trayori stood tall before his people and the cameras, his voice steady, his words unmistakable. "Let them praise. Let them threaten. Let them whisper. But understand this, dignity is not for hire." The people's voice. From dusty camps to crowded markets, the message spread, "We are poor, but we are free." A farmer told reporters, "Better to starve in dignity than eat in chains." A child whispered to Trayori, "Captain, will we have food?" He knelt down. "Maybe less food today, but more freedom tomorrow. And freedom will feed your soul long after bread is gone." The words echoed like prophecy across radios and village squares. The symbolism. Murals appeared on walls, the American flag descending, the AES alliance flag of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger rising. Beneath it, the words, "Our story, our pen." Trayori himself visited the mural quietly. He stared at the painting and whispered, "Is this not the real struggle? Not guns against guns, but voices against silence." The artist replied, "They once told us our history began with slavery. Now we tell them our history begins with sovereignty." The battle of narratives. Make no mistake, this struggle was never only about rifles and bullets. It was a war of words, a war of stories. 4 decades, from the polished halls of Washington, Paris, and Geneva, Africa's story was written by foreign pens. They decided who was a victim, who was a villain, and who was allowed to be called a hero. But on August 18, 2025, that script was torn to shreds. Standing before his council and his nation, Captain Ibrahim Trayori's voice carried the weight of centuries. "They brand us violators. They warn us of isolation. But tell me, who writes of our sacrifice? Who speaks of the graves dug by our own hands in villages where 2 million of our people are displaced? From today, the ink is ours." Outside the palace, a new flag climbed high above the crowds, the green and red banner of the AES alliance. And as it rose, voices broke into chants so raw they echoed like thunder. "Africa decides for Africa." The final challenge. The embassy gates now stood locked, their heavy steel doors sealed like the closing of an era. The American flag, once fluttering over Ouagadougou, was folded and carried away in silence. Yet as the dust settled, a deeper question lingered in the air, sharper than any decree. Was this the birth of liberation, or the first step into dangerous isolation? Could a poor nation, stripped of aid, truly carry its dignity without breaking? Could pride sustain its people when hunger pressed against their stomachs? Would sovereignty taste sweet in the shadow of empty clinics and shuttered classrooms? Or would the weight of sacrifice test the very soul of Burkina Faso? In the city square, silence gave way to a single voice. An elder, his back bent from years of toil, raised his hand above the crowd. His words cut through the hot Sahel air with the simplicity of truth. "Captain, you gave us back our pride. Even if the road is hard, we will walk it with you." The crowd erupted in agreement, a roar that shook the night. It was not a cheer of celebration, but a vow, a people declaring they would rather stumble in dignity than march in chains. And so the world watched, uncertain. Was this courage destined to inspire, or defiance doomed to collapse? Only time would tell. But in that moment, one thing was clear. Burkina Faso had chosen to stand, no matter the cost. Closing hook and call to action. So now, the question passes to you. Is this madness or courage? Recklessness or rebirth? Is this the dawn of a new Africa, or the beginning of peril? If you believe Africa's voice must rise, write "New Africa" in the comments. If you felt pride in your chest, do not scroll past. Like, share, and speak this story aloud. Because for too long, others wrote our history. Now it is time to write our future.